Well, Brian, Colorado has a defensive coordinator finally. Robert Livingston, after spending a long time on the Cincinnati Bengals coaching staff, good reputation in the NFL, but does not have prior experience as a defensive coordinator, uh, is hired by Coach Prime in the Buffaloes. What was your reaction to the news?
Yeah, my initial reaction was try to find out about this guy because I
Yeah.
didn't know, much about him. And yeah, initially I look at it and say that it's probably not what I would have pictured as the ideal hire. Yeah, I would think you would want somebody with defense coordinator experience. Um, I think all the signs were pointing towards it was going to be an NFL guy, so I'm not surprised by that. I would prefer someone that has been in the college ranks, but that doesn't. That's why I'm here and not a coach. But I don't think that matters as much. But yeah, initially it was a little surprised by it, but everything I hear about him is that he's a young up and coming coach and that he could be a really good hire in this position. So I'm one that likes to give the benefit of the doubt, and I'm willing to see what he can do.
One of the things I love is the fact that he is a disciple of Lou Anarumo, who is really widely considered one of the best defensive minds in the NFL. So that means he's one of the best defensive minds in the world. And he learned under three other previous defensive coordinators at Cincinnati, including Mike Zimmer, who was one of the guys that was rumored as a candidate. And maybe there was some buzz there, but uh, I like who he's learned under during his time at Cincinnati. And obviously, he's done a really good job of tutoring some of the guys. I'll run down some of those guys that he's coached that have done really well. But that's the first thing when I look for a positive with this hire
Mhm.
that I look to.
Yeah, and I think the Zimmer portion of it is important. And it's been I think a decade or so since he worked with Mike Zimmer. But I think he was in scouting at the time with the Bengals when Zimmer was
Yeah.
the defensive coordinator for the Bengals. But anybody that's followed Coach Prime knows that Mike Zimmer is his guy. I mean, that was his coach with the Cowboys many years ago. He is a Mike Zimmer guy, and so I would imagine that that Robert Livingston was recommended by Mike Zimmer. Even though it's been a decade, I'm sure they've kept in touch and things like that. And so I would imagine that this is someone that Mike Zimmer told Deion Sanders, hey, you should look at this guy. I mean, he's a really good up and coming coach. He's a guy that I hired or worked with in the Bengals, and I imagine that's where that connection came from.
And what we're reacting to, Brian, is we're talking about his resume, and that's what we have to work off right now.
Yep.
We weren't in the room when Coach Prime interviewed Livingston, and so that's the part of it that as everybody reacts, journalists, fans, yeah, there's part of a big part of this piece, and it's a chemistry piece with Coach Prime, and what he showed in that interview to prove that he's ready for this opportunity. Somebody has to get their first opportunity to be a defensive coordinator to have that experience, and so while it's certainly risky, and I would understand nervousness from fans just because he has not done that before, been a defensive coordinator. But there is a big chunk of this that we just don't know what happened behind the closed door when he was meeting with Coach Prime.
Yeah, and there's a lot of times that guys just kind of knock it out of the park in an interview, and so we don't know that, we don't know what happened with that, but and there's a lot of times too that like I said, my initial thought was, well, I'd like to have somebody that's already been a coordinator, but how many times have we seen guys that that get hired even by previous staffs here that you're like, ooh, wow, never heard of this guy, and then he winds up being a really good coach, who was the defensive line coach a few years ago that Mike McIntyre hired? Do you remember who I'm talking about?
Gerald Chapman or before
No, it was
that?
before that. Anyway, he was a young defensive line coach. He had never been a full-time D line coach, and but he had the ties with DJ Elliott, and came here and really popular among the players. And I'm totally blanking on his name. I'm sorry, but he was really popular among the players and was a really good coach and got a lot of work out of those defensive linemen. And Nick Williams is another one this last year that came to CU without that full-time coaching experience. Well, he was one of the more popular coaches on this staff last year and turned that into a new job at Syracuse. So not having that experience doesn't mean you can't do the job.
Yeah, if you go back over, I don't know how far you want to go back, maybe to the Barnett era if you want to, and you go back and look at what was the reaction from the fan base and then what was the result. A lot of the guys they got really excited about didn't end up living up to that hype and vice versa. So
Yep.
there is part of that to throw in there to your point as well. Um, Everybody that is doubting this hire will keep going back to the lack of experience as a
Yeah.
defensive play caller. And I don't know what else are those people. I think part of the issue too here, Brian, is that when Charles Kelly left Boulder, there were a couple tweets put out there that suggested that his replacement was going to blow people's minds, right? And so then the search taking as long as it did, and as good a resume as Robert Livingston has without that DC coordinator experience, obviously, uh, it's not a splash higher, and that's what people
Yeah.
expected. So I think that's somewhat of the pushback as well from any negativity that's out there.
Yeah, and I think, there was also this kind of belief because of, reading into the things that even Coach Prime was saying, in different interviews. I think people were reading into it like, all right, he's waiting for this person's season to end. It's somebody that's, going deep in the playoffs with their team in the NFL. Well, Robert Livingston, was with the Bengals who didn't even make the playoffs, and their season was done a month ago. And so, you look at it and say maybe this wasn't the first choice when you look at all that, but that doesn't matter. I mean, something happened to where Livingston became the choice, and you go back to you alluded to it, but like the point here is the chemistry with Coach Prime and with the players, and if that's what they felt um, Robert Livingston has, then that's more important than all that experience. I mean that stuff. There's enough people. That's the one thing about Coach Prime's staff is that he's got enough people around him that I think are going to help Robert Livingston. Vincent Dancy's been a coach for a long time. Andre Hart's been a coach for a long time. There's guys even on the support staff that have been coaches for a long time that are going to help him. Mike Zimmer, I'm sure is still somebody he can consult and talk to, and he's going to consult with his other mentors, things like that. So I don't worry as much about the experience. I think the bigger thing is kind of what you alluded to is that chemistry, and if that's there, then by all means, let's get behind this guy and say, let's see what he can do.
Livingston is originally from North Carolina. He's married, has three daughters. You mentioned the fact that he was a scout, and that was kind of how he got his foot in the door with the Bengals organization, scouting primarily in the ACC and the SEC. Then he gets elevated to be a quality control coach. He was a special teams assistant in 2015, and then promoted to safeties coach. In I think it was 7 seasons he had that role.
Eight
Uh,
seasons, I believe.
8 seasons at
Yeah.
Cincinnati, and really tutored some great players. You know,
Hmm.
Jesse Bates was an all-pro safety. Uh, he tutored Jordan Battle, who was one of their top defenders this last year, and so he was a guy that got the best out of his players. You know, if you look back at how those safeties performed under his tutelage in Cincinnati, they were among the better defensive players that they had on that defense.
Yeah, Von Bell's another one that he was there for a number of years. When they went to the Super Bowl, Bates and Bell were playing really good at safety, and they were two of the key guys on that defense. And both of them have they moved on in free agency, I believe, or trades, whatever it was. But they're with different teams this year. But yeah, he got the most out of those guys. And another one, I don't know how closely he worked with him, but Chidobe Awuzie is with the Bengals, and so he probably knows Livingston a little bit too. So yeah, he's gotten the most out of his guys, and I think that's what you hope for here. And he's got a good safety group to work with at Colorado, and now he just adds that coordinator piece to it.
He's still in his 30s. I think if you hired somebody that didn't have defensive coordinating experience and they were in their 50s, you'd scratch your head a little bit and go, okay, well,
Yeah.
what happened there? But yeah, it wasn't a crazy fast ascension in the coaching ranks, but what did he graduate? He graduated from William and Mary in 2009. So
Mhm.
this is a young guy, and he did work his way up in Cincinnati's coaching staff here over the last decade or so. So there was an upward trajectory, and he's still a young guy. Does you mentioned this earlier? You would have preferred a college guy. how much of this stuff translates from an NFL defense to college, and how much of a learning curve is that going to be for him? I don't follow the NFL all that closely, so that's one part of this that I'm kind of curious. He did spend a couple years in the college game and was at Vanderbilt for a year, so he does have a little college coaching experience, but not a ton of recent experience, or no recent experience in the college game.
Yeah, and I don't follow the NFL as close either, so I'm not really sure. But the fact that he is still young. I mean, 2009 when he finished at William and Mary was not that long ago, and so he does have those couple years coaching, but he was a player not too long ago either, and so I think that he can relate a little bit with these guys, and it's maybe a different game, and obviously William and Mary is a different level. But I was reading some of the stuff about him. He actually helped them beat Virginia in a game, so he knows a little bit about Power Five football. So and a pretty productive player for them. So I think it translates, and clearly, what Coach Prime is doing is he's trying to set these guys up for NFL and get NFL people in front of them and teaching them, and this fits with all that. And so you bring a guy like Robert Livingston that's been in the NFL for over a decade. I think guys gravitate towards that, and you have safeties on this team that Shiloh's in his last year and is aiming for the NFL. Obviously, Cameron Silman Craig, Trevor Woods, these are guys that they want to be in the NFL, and even obviously he's going to be working with the whole defense. You got a whole bunch of guys that are coming here, even as transfers with a year or two left, that they've got an eye on. They want to use Colorado as a springboard to the NFL. And so, Robert Livingston, I think, is a guy that can maybe put them in positions to where the defense can be good, but also put them into positions where they can, be looked at by the NFL. And so I think that's kind of what Coach Prime's looking at as well.
Was the prior defensive line coach you were talking about being better than people expected Quan Drake? Is that who you
Yes,
were talking about?
that's who it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
That was
Yep.
going to bother me for the rest of today. Well, I
Me
would
too.
have Googled it, but
Yeah.
yeah, no. Now there have been like Mitch Rodrigue came in and he wasn't experienced, but I mean,
Right.
was he even coaching in high school when he got hired at Colorado?
Well, he was before. I don't know if he was at that time, but he had been for about a year or two. But I'm not sure if he was at that time.
Yeah. So we've seen
Yeah.
some really out of left field hires, and
Right.
this is not in that category. Even though, again, I think a little bit of it just comes down to expecting this splash hire and not taking place. But I'm I would say that Colorado fans should take a wait and see approach with this, and
Yeah.
you know, you would love to have a defensive coordinator that's 45 years old that is coached in college for the last 15 years and is widely respected, but a lot of those guys are happy where they are. They demand big bucks, and this is a good opportunity, I think, for Livingston, and I would imagine he's going to come in pretty hungry to prove himself, because there are going to be some of that there is going to be some of that chatter about just his lack of experience, and I think he's going to want to prove folks wrong.
Yeah, and I think one thing that fans love to do, and I know I do it, and you probably do too, is when a new coordinator is hired, fans like to go back and look at, all right, what's their track record? What was their offense or defense like at this place and this place and this place? And I know that's what I did with Charles Kelly. Is like, okay, what did he do at Florida State? What were his defenses like? What did he do, at Tennessee and all these places? And you don't have that with Robert Livingston. So it is kind of that wait and see approach. Like, all right, well, what does his defense look like? We don't really know yet, and so. I'm curious to see what all that looks like, but there are a lot of hires that guys don't have that previous experience and they work out. Sometimes they don't, but you made the point earlier. You got to get your start somewhere, and if this is somebody that Coach Prime believes in, can be a good leader for this defense, then if you're a Buff fan, you should get behind it, and let's just see what happens as the games go along. Now, if they're giving up 500 yards and 40 points every week, now all of a sudden you can criticize. But I think at this point, just take that wait and see, and get behind Coach Prime on it.
Colorado added another high school player in the 2024 class this week. Kyeran Garcia from Fort Myers, Florida, comes on board. Did you have any reaction to him coming on board with the Buffs?
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, the first one was surprised because I didn't think anything was going to happen yesterday, and then I saw that one. But um, you know, initially you look at it and say, okay, 21 offers, but none of them were Power Five other than Colorado, and so maybe a little under the radar type of guy, but highly productive. I mean, you go to his on his Max Press page, and very highly productive. I think 140 tackles each of the last 2 years. I think he had what 22 tackles for loss this last year, 10 sacks, something like that. So highly productive at his high school. That doesn't always translate, but you like a guy that's been that productive, that's around the ball. And if you're a linebacker, I want a linebacker that's been around the ball a lot, and so he clearly shows that instinct.
Yeah, yeah, highly productive, like you said, and you throw in the fact that he's a 4.3 student and had service
Yeah.
academies, Ivy League schools
Hmm.
coming after him. That's kind of a cherry on top of signing a guy like him. Probably more developmental, right? I mean, he did have a growth spurt, and I think he's still kind of filling out now into his frame because he's 6'2" or 6'3", and he was only 6 foot a couple years ago. So still kind of filling out his frame a little bit, but yeah, I mean, I love his film. I love the vigor that he plays the game with him. He's a very aggressive, flies around to the field type of guy.
Yeah.
In some of those plays, he's bringing down a bigger offensive player again because he's on a little bit more of the slender side. But developmental piece at linebacker, and this is a guy that you can get out on special teams. I would think pretty early in his career. That's one area that you're not necessarily signing guys to have them be special teams players throughout their career, but early on, that is a path for a guy to get his feet wet. And so I wouldn't be surprised if Kyeran Garcia has a role on special teams pretty early on. But the linebacker is still a need for this program,
Right.
and that will be addressed. We think during the spring transfer window. So I don't know. Is it one or two linebackers on the portal? I still think they need probably two.
Yeah, I would think too. You look at this linebacker group, and I feel pretty good about that front line. I feel like they've done some good things there. BJ Green, adding him, I think was huge. And to me, that's the biggest addition of the offseason on that side of the ball is BJ Green. I think he's a difference maker type of player. I like Chidozie Nwankwo there as well, and Samuel, what his last name from Pitt.
Okunlola.
Yeah, yeah. So I like those guys. So I like what they've done there. The secondary, I think, was already pretty solid. And then you add Preston Hodge, who I think is a guy that can make an impact as well. But linebacker, it just feels like there's not enough quite there. DJ Lundy, we were excited about, but that one fell through. And so I do think you need probably one or two guys, especially we're not far removed from Trevor Woods having to play linebacker because they didn't like what they had there, and
Yeah.
and some of those pieces are gone. So I would like to see a couple other linebackers, but and outside of that, I'm not sure there's a whole lot of positions in need at this point. But linebacker to me might be number one.
So the Buffs finished with 7 high school signees in the 2024 class. It sounds like they're going to have more than that in 2025, but it's still not going to be a big high school class. And I think that's going to be the year-to-year situation as long
Yeah,
as Coach Prime is in Boulder because they are going to utilize more of the transfer portal. And you see other programs following suit. As much flack as Coach Prime took last year, you look at across the country, maybe not as big an overhaul as what Colorado did last year because we all know why they had to do that. Other programs don't necessarily have to clean house that same way, but you are seeing a lot more action in terms of these top programs really seeing the value in getting guys from the portal as opposed to having to go to the high school ranks, develop these kids, and then not knowing if they're going to stick around anyway. So,
yeah.
as much flack as they took, like I said last year, that's kind of a trend now in college football, and it's certainly not going to change anytime soon.
No, it's not going to change, especially because there are those opportunities to, patch a hole immediately. And, just a few years ago, it was you would get those JUCO kids, right? And, Mike McIntyre was big on that at the time where he would try to go get some JUCO kids to just patch some holes that you couldn't fill through high school recruiting or whatnot. But now you do that through the transfer portal. And, every year there's going to be holes because that's the way college football is. And, Coach Prime has made it very clear that's what he likes to do. I mean, he I don't know the term he uses, but he likes those high school kids to cook a little bit, and marinate or whatever it is. But he wants to win now, and that's always going to be the case. It's not just because his sons are on the team and this is their last year. He's going to always want to win now, and however long he coaches here, whether it's 1 year, one more year, 5 more years, 10 more years, he's always going to want to win now, and so that's always going to be his philosophy, I believe.
Well, I'm excited that we don't have to get asked all throughout the day. When is Colorado going to hire their new DC anymore? And I'm excited to get to meet Robert Livingston, and
Yeah.
hopefully we get a chance as media to talk to him in the future. Anxious to kind of see what his defense and his philosophy is, and hear from Coach Prime too about what made Livingston stand out during the process, and what were things that impressed him during that interview. So right now, reacting a lot to his resume, and anxious to fill in those gaps a little bit as we get closer and into spring ball.
Yeah, and it's going to be an interesting Buffs team this year because, both coordinators now, obviously Pat Shermer was with Colorado last year, but both coordinators are really longtime NFL guys that haven't spent much time in the college game over the last decade. So it's going to be interesting to see what this Buffs team looks like with NFL guys running the show.
All right. The last time we met up, Brian, was at the Dark Horse. Where are we going to meet up next?
Ooh, we got Sink. We want to go to the Sink
We can do that. We've been there
or
before. It's a great place. Yeah.
or the breakfast spots. There's always the Village Coffee House and things like that. There's plenty of places to go to.
I think we still have more exploring to do though.
Definitely. I mean, there's a lot more places that CU fans bring up to me like, oh, I've never tried that before. And fans have gotten on me before, and I explain I don't live in Boulder, so I don't do a lot of I don't eat in Boulder a whole lot. And so it took me a while to get to the Dark Horse into the Sink, and probably disappointed a lot of CU fans that way. But we certainly have some more exploring to do.
I just remembered that in the parking garage randomly last season, I asked Andre Hart where his favorite lunch spot is, and he said Avanti in Boulder. So maybe that's a possibility.
All
I've
right.
never been there before.
Well, we did have a thing early last year. We're like, maybe we should try to ask every assistant, where to go because we went to a couple of assistant recommended places. Charles Kelly recommended it was the
Goodfellas Cafe. I think
yeah,
that's
yeah.
what ruined the whole project for us. Not that it was a bad meal, but it wasn't
Yeah,
like you're not writing home about your experience at
right, right.
Goodfellas Cafe.
And we went to a pizza place recommended by South Sincere that was actually pretty good.
Bruschettas, I think.
Yeah, yep, yep.
Yeah, it was good.
So that was good.
Thumbs
So
up
yeah,
on that.
we're gonna need some more staff recommendations, that's for sure.
All right, Brian, are you excited like me that we don't have to get asked about this DC
I
uh,
am, and
pending
you know,
hire every
the
day?
one thing that's still unclear right now is defensive line because there's been some question of what's going on with Sal Sunseri. But as far as I know, he's still on the staff, and it's just there was that one video where Coach Prime mentioned, there's two people missing, DC and defensive line coach, so there's still that question mark. But I believe it's still Sal, but we're just not sure yet, and so we're kind of waiting to hear from CU. CU has never officially announced any of these hires yet. I know just the way they do things. They're waiting for all the pieces to come into play before they announce, and so we'll see if Robert Livingston's hire leads to CU actually officially making those hires and announcing them.
All right, well, we're pretty sure though Robert Livingston is the
Yes.
new CM Boulder. So we'll be back with more analysis soon.